everyone, a quick video here on positivity and negativity, and I want to talk about this specifically in terms of the benefit that we believe we get from adopting one perception or another. Now, in previous videos we've talked about self-image or ego, and we know that ultimately we choose a positive or negative view of things in order to validate and justify that self-image because it ultimately holds a benefit for us. It makes us feel more secure, and in a lot of ways it gives us more energy to continue on. So when we talk about adopting a negative or a positive perspective of anything, whether it be the world, a situation, yourself, what we're really looking at is what benefit do we believe we're going to get from that. Now, it's easy to forget that we think we're going to get a benefit from a negative perspective, but the fact is that we start out that way. Later on it becomes a habit, but at first we use negatives as a way of motivating us. We want to change our life, and so we look at it in the worst way possible so that way we will be more likely to move in a different direction. When you're talking about the carrot or the stick, the negative perspective is often the stick. And a good example of that is when we vilify a particular habit, smoking, overeating, and the people who have those habits as a way of moving ourselves out of that habit. And I can't tell you how many people will try to quit drinking or try to quit smoking by vilifying everybody else who does those things. And that may make sense, and sometimes it actually works. You can quit a negative habit, you can get out of a negative situation by driving yourself with that motivator, but what happens is, unfortunately, even when you're moving in a more positive direction, the negative perspective that you have adopted and taken in as a habit will actually start to become ubiquitous, and you will experience that negative no matter if you're moving in a positive direction. So you may be moving in the right direction, but unfortunately you lack the ability to appreciate it because of the tool that you've used. Now, just as likely as if you adopt a positive perspective of everything, what's happening is you're actually trying to ignore the side that would tear down that positivity, because the more positive we are, obviously, the more energy we have. But what ends up happening there is that we vilify everything that's negative. And so more and more things become negative. And we become more and more desperate to vilify those things to the point where we become unwilling to actually recognize their existence. And this is why a lot of people who are very positive have trouble recognizing the negative intentions in other people. And it's simply because they don't want to look at the capability to be negative within themselves. And so they can't see it anywhere else in the world. So being positive may offer you more hope. It may offer you the perspective that something better is right around the corner. But unfortunately, you will always be on guard even when you get to that better thing, because you're always trying to maintain your positive perspective. So while both negative and positive might offer some motivation, some energy towards changing your life, unfortunately they both come with consequences. And that is often the one thing I caution people about. It's not that it's a bad thing to look at the world in a negative or positive perspective. It's our overcommitment to one side or the other that can actually result in consequences. So one thing that I encourage people to do is, if you tend to be a negative individual, and what I mean by that is not as a self-defining trait, but that you choose more and more a negative perspective of what's going on around you or yourself, then I would encourage you to recognize that there is a positive perspective of whatever you're viewing as negative. Now, I'm not telling you to ignore the negative perspective that you have. You've learned to look at the world that way, and ultimately there's a reason for that. But if you get too caught up in it, then it ends up being a trap. So what I encourage you to do is recognize that there is a positive perspective. You may not be able to see it clearly, you may not be able to appreciate it, but recognition that it does exist does in fact diffuse the perspective that you are in. It makes it less of, okay, well, this is the only way to look at this, and more of an option. This is an optional way to look at this, and that will help you change your perspective more easily and more freely. Now, I would encourage a negative person to look at the positive in the same way that I would encourage somebody who is always looking at the positive to try and recognize the negative, because it's important that we see all perspectives of what is, because you can't choose one side or the other and hold on to that without recognizing that everybody else's perspective of that same thing has an equal validity. Now, the problem is that we fail to understand, or rather we misinterpret what the mind does. When we choose a negative or a positive perspective, our mind will validate and justify it with hundreds of thoughts, ideas, beliefs, and situations that very much offer proof that that perspective is valid. And we assume that it is proof. But if you were to adopt a different perspective, your mind would do the very same thing to validate that perspective. And so that kind of calls into question what is exactly real? What is exactly the proper perspective of any situation? And ultimately, the proper perspective is all of them. Recognizing all of the valid perceptions of any situation will offer you more insight in a wider context than simply struggling to hold on to one side or the other. Because if you're doing that, you're wasting energy and attention and time and focus that you ultimately could be putting into your life now. But we spend so much time trying to label and narrate our experience that very little of our attention actually goes into living the experience. We would rather discuss it in our mind and have an opinion about it and hold on to one perspective of the other because of the security that that perspective offers us in terms of self-image. Whereas if we didn't do that, sure, we would be able to look at both sides of the coin, which would offer us less of a self-definition. It's very hard to define yourself when you're not sitting on one side or the other. But on the other hand, now we're not looking at things from a tunnel vision kind of view, and we're actually able to put our attention and our energy and our influence into what's going on right now. And we're able to have more insight, and we're able to have more attention at our disposal. And that is ultimately the energy that we need to change our lives for the better, or even have the clarity to understand what that means. So when I talk about positivity or negativity, both sides have their uses in the same way as self-image has its uses. But it's our overcommitment to the idea that security can be found in one side or the other, or that the benefit can be found in one side or the other, that is ultimately causing us the most consequence. So my recommendation, as always, is to see both sides and define yourself with neither. Try and experience the world in a way where you are not constantly narrating your view of it. Just see the world, and don't necessarily cast your opinion, and you will be amazed at the energy that you will find, and ultimately the life that you will be able to make. If you abandon the life that you're trying to make right now, simply through sitting on one side or the other. If you do that, you will have half an experience, you will experience half the energy, and ultimately you will only get a half-assed manifestation when you fully are capable of manifesting something much better. So that's my thought on positivity and negativity. If you have any thoughts, of course, or questions, comment below or get in touch with me. I'm always happy to talk about this. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good one.